There's an extreme level of hate in Gaza, and the educational system. I mean, we saw now when the soldiers went in, the things they found kids' puzzles showing, depicting Palestinians invading Israel. They showed kids' computers with the background of Hitler on. Is it possible, and how would one deprogram such an intense level of hate looking towards the future, whatever the future will bring, but this point specifically?
Well, some people say that having watched the footage of the 7th, some people, journalists and others, have said, these people are behaving like psychopaths. I said there's one important differentiation, which actually a psychologist I spoke with in Israel enlightened me to, which is, of course, the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. That a psychopath is probably born, a sociopath is made. Hamas has had control of Gaza for 18 years, which is precisely the time from a child's birth to the end of their formal education. In 18 years, you can make a sociopath. And in my view, Hamas has made a generation of sociopaths. How could you not? How could you not if you were educated into this absolutely apocalyptic end-time jihadist cult? So there'll be two things to solve. One is the de-radicalization of an entire population, and I'm not sure that's been tried before, certainly not for a very long time. And it certainly can't be done without winning. It can't be done without Hamas being visibly defeated and crushed. And the second is, who will do the educating from now on? Now, of course, the UN is meant to be responsible for much of this, but we know that the UN has proved not just incapable, but wicked in not just stopping hate, but actually encouraging and paying for hate to be taught in Palestinian schools. And again, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. I would listen to people like David Cameron and their plans for the Middle East when they can explain to me how either the PA or Hamas should be able to run one school or one hospital. I say, since I think the two-state solution business is all nonsense now, it's all dead, obviously, certainly for the time being, for the foreseeable future. As people sometimes say, well, what is your plan? I was saying it's slightly sarcastic, but not entirely, which is give the Palestinians one thing to run. Give them one school to run and see if they can do it. See if that one school can avoid teaching to kill the Jews. See if that one school can actually teach maths and arithmetic and literature and reading and writing, and not teach the students to kill the Jews. Maybe they should give them one hospital. See if they can just avoid the temptation to make it into a weapons dump. And then we'll see. But at the moment, they've proved incapable of this.
But that's a pretty bleak outlook for the future, given that there, firstly, are 5 million Arabs between the West Bank and the Gaza, and secondly, that the international community doesn't see it that way. So from a more, to call it realistic or practical perspective, what do you see even in the short term, over the next 12 months, even if Hamas is crushed as a movement, what moves do you see happening next to implement a way forward?
I think what I've just said is the position you have to start from, which is the recognition that there's nothing that the Palestinians have been given which they haven't been able to muck up, which they haven't been able to turn to the disadvantage of the Palestinian people, as well as the Israeli people.
But that's unlikely to happen given the UN backing for their position. And what do you feel can be done?
My view is that it's a pretty insoluble problem for the time being, because it's extremely hard to give lots of things to people who want to kill. And no other country will put up with it. My view is that the Palestinians have mucked it up for themselves. We accept that there are problems around the world which are not currently solvable, and maybe this is one of them. When somebody knocks their head against the wall repeatedly and makes no progress, you would have thought that you could decide perhaps that this was not the wall to hit your head against.
You appeared on TV and on speaking engagements around the world, and probably the most visible or loudest pro-Israel voice globally. Why? Why have you devoted everything to fight this cause? And why indeed are you so clearly passionate about it?
Well, in a way, I'd turn around the question and say, why wouldn't you be? And who wouldn't be? I've covered a lot of wars in my life, and I've been in Israel during many wars, as well as during peacetime, since the 2006 Lebanon-Hezbollah war. And I certainly noticed then, 18 years ago now, the extraordinary disconnect between what I was seeing on the ground and what I was reading in the international media. And, it's very striking to me. I was in Ukraine last year, or the year before, and was with the Ukrainian forces. They were pushing back against the Russian advances, and I saw only international support for the Ukrainian army in their war against the aggressors. And I saw nobody saying that the Ukrainians should be more careful or shouldn't be allowed to win, or that really what we must do is to get to a ceasefire situation. Only in conflicts involving Israel does that happen. And when you say, why am I so motivated by it? Largely, I would say it's because I have an intense dislike of lies, and I'm motivated by searching for the truth. And if you are interested in searching for the truth, when it comes to conflicts involving the only Jewish state in the world and any of its enemies, you just see a sea of lies pushed out. And I believe that they're pushed out largely through intense animus, including bigotry towards the Jewish state. And I also think, as a second order, I'm motivated because I think that the people who are doing this and who always do this to the state of Israel when it's in a war are the same people who do the same thing to my country of Britain and to America and to all the Western democracies. There's an absolutely clear line of predictability. If somebody gives you their views on Palestinian, Hamas, Israel conflicts, you can guess where they are about Britain and about America and everything else. You can pretty much guess their views on capitalism, on Cuba these days. You can guess their attitudes on everything. This is a la carte bigotry.
So this is personal. As a British citizen, you feel almost personal about it.
I feel very personal about it, and not just as a British citizen, but as a human being.
How would you therefore understand the vast majority of your journalistic colleagues that don't seem to be able to differentiate right and wrong as clearly as you have? I mean, when you speak, obviously I've got loads of family in Israel, so I'm somewhat biased, but you as a more objective journalist who is so clearly differentiating between right and wrong, and yet, as you said right at the beginning, the question should be flipped. Why are you so in a spotlight and you're not joined by the masses?
Well, I'd like to be. I am in some ways. I think the silent majority, as it's often described, I always wish was less silent, understands a lot of the things that I understand. It's a peculiarity of our era that it's unusual to see things as I see it among the commentariat, among the journalistic and political classes. I think it's a lot of things. If I was able to put it down to two groups, I would say that there's a group of journalists and others who find the Israel-Palestinian issue an enormously comfortable conflict to commentate on. Not to make it too simplistic, but, Syria is a pretty difficult conflict to cover, which is why pretty much since the murder of Marie Colvin, very few Western journalists were in Syria. Some of those who were fell into the hands of ISIS. The Ukraine war isn't much fun to cover. Most wars in the Middle East aren't. Very few journalists have made it to Yemen in the last few years, when about 400,000 people have been killed by Muslims. Of Muslims by other Muslims. But the Israel-Palestinian issue, you can cover it. You can stay at the American Colony Hotel in East Jerusalem. You can have cocktails by the pool, and you can put on a flak jacket, stand outside, and report back to London or Washington from occupied East Jerusalem. It's quite a comfortable conflict in that way, and I don't say that lightly. Journalists overdo their bravery, and so that's one thing. The second thing is, I think, is the bigotry that exists. And I think a lot of people are entirely unaware of it. They obsess about this one country. And I just always want to ask them, why? Why? Where were you with the Uyghurs in China? Where were you when Assad was slaughtering many times the number of people who had been killed in every war involving Israel? Where were you on Yemen? Where were you on any of this? And the answer is you were nowhere. So the onus is on them, in my view, to explain why this is, why this peculiarity, why this fetish.
But have you ever had occasion to speak or question some of these journalists who are involved in the Middle Eastern conflict and who are reporting in what you would really call a biased or a subjective fashion? Have you asked them, and what has been their response?
Yes, I mean, I've spoken to many of my colleagues across the media. And generally speaking, what it is that they go in and they know how to cover this conflict. The conflict always begins with Israel, not when Israel is attacked, but when it responds, as you know. I mean, I said on October the 7th to a friend, I think they'll probably give us a day, the world. They'll give us a day to say, oh, something terrible has happened. But sure enough, by the next day, by the Sunday, all of the world's media, Israel's retaliation, what will Israel's disproportionate reaction be, how will Israel... That's what they're interested in.
They were defending themselves before they actually made a move itself.
Yes, I mean, people, as we know, there were protests in London and in New York, where I was on the 7th, in Times Square the next day. They were protesting against Israel before Israel had done anything. All that had happened was that Israel had been attacked. But they're already onto it. They're already het up on this. I think they enjoy this line of story. I think they enjoy the line of, oh, what will Israel's terrifying response be? And there's lots of reasons for that, by the way. One of them, again, to go back to, is a technical one. I have a friend who's a Palestinian journalist who years ago wrote something critical of Yasser Arafat, and it was made very clear that he was never to return to the West Bank again. It's the same with any reporter for Sky or BBC. If they were to expose the corruption, not just of Hamas, but of the PLO, the PA, they would find it quite hard to operate in areas they would like to operate on. I do, by contrast, notice that the Israeli media, like the British and American media, has no problem criticizing its own leaders. So yes, you can... You can report on aspects of this conflict quite comfortably. There are other aspects on it you cannot report on quite comfortably. And this desire to sort of say, we will focus on the response, always leads to this just absolute skewing of the reporting, of the direction of the war. I've just written a piece in my column in The Spectator this week saying, we've heard a lot about Palestinian refugees in Gaza, and perhaps rightly so. But nobody in the international media talks about the tens of thousands of Israeli families who are effectively refugees inside their own country, the displaced people from the north, the displaced families from the south. The world media doesn't seem to care about this. One reason why, of course, as you both know, but some people listening might not, is that the Israeli government actually looks after the Israeli people who can't live in their houses because they're within rocket fire of Hezbollah or Hamas. The Hamas in Gaza noticeably does not seem to exercise the same duty of care to the people in Gaza, but people can draw their own conclusions from that.
I suppose that differentiates you massively from the other journalists who never bother to actually go to a place and see it with their own eyes.
No, they don't bother to speak to people.